click the live button.
Perfect.
The live button. We are live.
Wonderful. Thank you. So welcome to the May 25th Finance Committee meeting. This should be our last virtual meeting, as I think we're going to resume in-person meetings here in just a couple of weeks. Jenny, we call the roll.
Mr. Keeler?
Here.
Ms. Aludo?
Here. And Greg Peterson will not be joining us. He has an excused absence, so we will work very hard to make him proud in his absence. So the first order of business is approval of the minutes from the April 19th committee meeting, and I will make a motion to approve those.
I'll second.
Jenny?
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keeler?
Yes.
Great. One thing done. Awesome. All right. So for our first agenda item, we have Visit Dublin, Ohio.
Yes, thank you, Council Member Aludo. We're going to have a couple of agenda items today. The first one is Visit Dublin, Ohio. We have Scott During from Visit Dublin, Ohio here. I'm going to give a short presentation of 2 or 3 slides and then let Scott have the floor, and then we'll have a staff recommendation following his comments.
Okay, great. Excellent. Hi, Scott. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Okay, so the first screen, there's the Finance Committee screen. Just to orient you to why we're having this conversation today, as part of the 2021 operating budget, the City of Dublin provided additional support above and beyond the 35% typically allocated to Visit Dublin, Ohio, and that is, of course, because of the decline in bed tax revenues. It was determined that the budget for Visit Dublin, Ohio would be based on a 6-month budget because of the rapidly changing situation, and that appropriation would be revisited in the current fiscal year. And here it is May, so we're going to revisit it for the second half of 2021. The idea behind the appropriation that ran from January till June was that it would serve the citizens of Dublin and give Visit Dublin, Ohio a $40,000 operating budget. And the details of that are on this slide. The important component is bolded, and that basically broke down to set their budget at $400,000. The city was going to make $173,000 in direct monthly payments, averaging that $28,837. This is the year to date and the estimated based on previous estimates from Visit Dublin, Ohio, and their estimates for July through December this year. As you can see, for better or worse, unfortunately, we have had a 60% decline in bed tax revenues, which is exactly what we budgeted for. So as far as the first half appropriation goes, we do not need to make any adjustments to that. That has basically been right on the money. So we don't need to add anything or subtract anything from that when we're discussing the second half appropriation. I'll let Scott give the details on how these numbers were selected, but the basic financial situation is that we're going to increase the budget from a guaranteed $400,000 to $550,000. That's based on some increased bed tax revenues. As you can see there, we were projecting and realized really a 60% decline in the first half. We're only predicting a 38 or 40% decline in the second half. From the city's perspective, the $173,000 appropriation for the first 6 months has been utilized. We would recommend an additional appropriation to cover the second 6 months of about $116,000. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott.
Great, thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Do you mind if I share something, a chart? Is that cool?
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, let me do that. All right, so projection wise, and I think this is important to your dealings with the Arts Council and everything else you have with the upcoming bed tax revenue for the second half of this year, July through December of 21. We work with all our hoteliers very closely, getting their projections, seeing what's on the books, looking at our research. And these are the numbers we're projecting. We're projecting that there's going to be an 80% increase in bed tax revenue from July through December based on the previous July through December, which sounds like a huge jump. It is, but it's still substantially below, 38% below where we were in 2019. So this chart basically shows what our Visit Dublin, the 35% of our bed tax was through just July through December, to give you an apples to apples comparison. In 19, that was 700,000, which was great. It was 8% over 18. And then 2020 hit, you can see the dramatic decrease, as Matt mentioned, 66% decrease. And then we're projecting an 80% increase, which would get us at 434 for the projected amount. So that kind of gives you a baseline of where we got to the projection part of it. If I scroll down here exactly on the funding that we're requesting, again, thank you for your consideration on this, but we're looking at, as Matt said, the first half of this year, January through June, the subsidy was around 174,000, and that got us at 570,000. And keep in mind, Matt's chart had about 400,000 of bed tax. We had some PPP money, some partnership money that we were able to up that, or some reserves that we use on our own to get to that 570 number. So that's where you see the discrepancy between the bed tax and the 400 and the 570 number. The number we're requesting, I'm projecting on that bed tax of being 434. We need to get at the 550 number. And I think where we've created a marketing plan that gets us, and I won't go into the detail on the memo. You read that and saw that. I'm happy to do so if you'd like on what the deliverables are going to be for your investment for the second half of the year. But that's the main number we need to get to, the 550, to make an impact and help the local economy. And the gap funding on the 434 projection is 116. So that's how we came up with the numbers. The only thing that we're requesting is there's no way to predict that 434. We could do much better and we could need less money from all of you, or we could do a lot worse and we may need a little bit more. But we're in a kind of a unique situation because all our media buys and so forth, probably 80% of that 550 is going to be spent by the time we get to August and September, just because of the way our business works and our campaigns and such. So we're kind of all in at this point. We can't backpedal in November and say, FYI, bed tax is way down. We need to cut back on programs. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, if that makes sense from you marketing folks out there. Stop sharing. Anything else, Matt, that you want me to cover?
No, I appreciate that, Scott. So then staff does have a recommendation for the Finance Committee. We're recommending that you recommend to the full council that funding for the Visit Dublin, Ohio in the second half of the year in the amount of $116,000 be included in the June supplemental ordinance to get that appropriation in the budget. We're also recommending that you recommend to full council that the appropriation continue to be monitored by the Finance Committee so that we can continue to meet and discuss this. As Scott said, it's going to be heavily upfront cost. So it's something we'll want to look at and monitor very closely and very timely. We have a couple of meetings in the summer that the Finance Committee could be a part of if hotel motel revenues change in some fundamental way. And that's really the second half, is that we'll continue to monitor these revenues and keep Finance Committee apprised of any increases or decreases in them. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I turn it over to the chair. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both very much. I really appreciate it. Scott, as always, we appreciate how transparent you are with the work that you and your team does, and the impact that it has. It's been a an incredibly difficult year for everybody. So we really appreciate it. I am very much in favor of the $116,000 appropriation, including just continued monitoring by Finance Committee for the remainder of the year. I'm really, really hopeful that the bed tax fund is going to do even better, because I know there's a lot of pent up demand, as we talked about at council meeting last night. Andy, what are your thoughts?
I agree. And I'm going to ask an obvious question, and I think it's pretty clear, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The 174 was specifically for the first half of the year. So we anticipated from the very beginning we were going to be having this meeting reevaluating for the second half. And the numbers look good. So the number we're expecting or we want to appropriate for the second half is lower than what we appropriated the first time, right? Okay, I'm good with it.
Super. Jenny, do we need like an official vote on that to take that, or can I just bring that to committee reports at the next council meeting?
If you both are in agreement, then you can just take it as a report and make that recommendation to council.
You got it. I will do so. All right, awesome. Well, Scott, again, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, and appreciate your time last night as well at council. And unless, do you have anything else you want to add, or are we good to go?
No, just to thank you. I mean, you guys have been behind us in our industry from day one, and it's appreciated, I can tell you. And we'll continue to be transparent, get you the results. And like you said, I think we're hoping that 116 number will be much lower than higher. So, but we'll see how it goes. We appreciate your help. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for your partnership.
Yep.
Thanks, Scott.
Awesome. All right. Agenda item, I guess number 3 is stormwater grant program. So this is staff's follow-up to our request for sort of a more fully baked grant program process. So who's presenting this one? Oh, Nick.
I am.
Great.
Hello, members of the committee. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to be giving the presentation today, but I do want to acknowledge that we have Aaron Stanford from engineering who is available to answer any engineering specific questions. Kirby Dirth, who you heard from back in February, who's done substantial research on this topic and has been a key part of the development of the proposal, is available. And then certainly Matt Stifler is available if there are any finance oriented questions, and I'm available as well. So just as a quick refresh for the committee, back in February, we spent a little bit of time walking through this project timeline. So as a really quick reminder, this topic was delegated to the Community Services Advisory Commission back in 2019. They had some substantial discussion about the 48 city-owned, privately maintained basins in question, brought forward a recommendation to City Council, who had some robust discussion regarding the recommendation of assuming the maintenance, but identifying a financing option before assuming that maintenance. It was delegated back to the commission. And then in October of 2020, they brought forward a recommendation for this stormwater basin maintenance grant program proposal. In the February presentation, we also provided a synopsis of the CSAC discussion, how they arrived at their rationale, all of the things that they considered, as well as providing then a high-level overview of the proposed grant program. So if you recall, the committee had some pretty substantial discussion around this topic, had quite a few questions for staff to return back to. So in your packet that you received, I believe last week, we attempted to respond to all of the questions that we believe we pulled out during that February meeting, and did our best attempt at responding to those questions. We also amended the grant program framework a little bit, and I did my best to highlight in yellow all of those changes for you all. And so I did want to call attention here to one specific change that I think does address quite a few of some of the questions and sticking points for the committee at the last meeting, which is requiring any applicant to meet with the grant review team in advance of submitting a grant application. So if you recall, there were some questions about how do you make sure an applicant understands the spirit of the program, what types of maintenance fit within this program and which don't, how do we avoid receiving an overload of applications that do not apply to this program. And I think this is a good measure to prevent any of those things from happening. Very similar to the Beautify Your Neighborhood grant program, where it's strongly encouraged that any applicant meet with the grant review team. So before I dive into the specific grant program itself, I did want to provide an opportunity to you all, if you have any questions about any of the packet materials that were provided to you, specifically the response follow-up that I provided. Now would be a great time to ask any of those questions.
Thanks for helping to put this together. Andy, I'm not sure where you're at with it, but as I looked through here, it feels like you really addressed all of the concerns that we had. I do think it's a really good idea that we require, particularly during the pilot, that we would require them, not strongly recommend, but require them to meet with the grant review committee, because we don't want to waste anybody's time if they're not really going to be eligible. So I think that piece is really important, and I noticed it pretty much right away. What are your thoughts, Andy? Do you have other questions about what they sent?
So just trying to refresh my memory, as I recall, there were maybe 46 of these.
So there were 46 previously. I actually, and I have a slide here right at the end of our presentation that I think may be helpful for the committee as you're considering your recommendation. In our discussion, one of the things we wanted to pull out is sort of the age of some of the basins in question, recognizing that really that's going to be the key component of the sort of spirit of the program. That's where they're going to be coming up on some of these non-routine maintenance items that they might not be expecting and may need some financial support that they were not planning for. But in identifying that, what it is it's actually 48 city-owned, privately maintained basins, not 46. So that's our mistake.
Okay.
And then there are 4 ponds that are also city-owned, privately maintained, but those would not be included in this program. Those are not stormwater, they're just aesthetic ponds that exist but are on city property,
Okay.
but privately maintained.
So let's say we've got 48 and we have a $30,000 annual budget, up to $10,000 per pond. It would seem to me that if this is, I haven't read with a lot of detail the differentiation between routine maintenance and, as you kind of alluded to a minute ago, more of like a capital improvement type thing, where this thing is aging and there's like almost like an infrastructure or something needs to be rebuilt. It's not, this money isn't to be used for algae removal, right? It's for an improvement to get the retention basin back up to spec, if you will. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, correct.
Yeah. It seems to make perfect sense to me. How long is the pilot?
We would propose at least 2 years for the pilot, but certainly if you think that there's a more appropriate time frame, and you could extend the pilot at 2 years if, say, we get maybe there's 2 applications each year, and they're great projects, but we're still unsure of the need and the longevity of the program. Maybe we extend it another year or 2 as well. I think that there's opportunity to do that at the end of the pilot period, but we would recommend no less than 2 years.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I agree.
So you mentioned the age. So in looking at the different criteria and sort of the scoring points, I know that like capacity degradation and erosion are all sort of a factor of age. Would it be, maybe this is an engineering question, I don't know. Would it matter if we asked what the age is in the application or as part of that scoring criteria? Because if we have one that's really severely eroded and poses a lot of safety concerns and it's, a 5-year-old, retention pond, maybe there's another problem. Like maybe there needs to be an overhaul. Like maybe it's not just a, like a capital improvement kind of a thing. Maybe it needs to be something more, like it needs to be looked at. And maybe that's not a thing. I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that, but Aaron Stanford is on and he may be able to respond to that. But I cannot speak to that specifically.
Hi,
Thanks,
Aaron.
Sarah.
I see that you
Hello.
magically
How's everybody
appeared on my screen.
How's everybody doing?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Pretty good.
Good.
So your question is a good one, and basically, I think the scenario that you're talking about, it could happen. So I think the age of a stormwater pond is going to be probably the best indicator of its service life getting to the end when we run into those major maintenance items that need to happen. That being said, you are correct that before it gets to that point in its life, there could be, any sooner period where there are other serious things that need to be taken care of. Now, while that's not common, it's not impossible. So I think as part of so one of the things that we talked about and Nick talked about a little bit earlier is part of the map, we wanted to identify those older ponds. So those would be the ones that we would assume would be the most likely that are going to need that larger maintenance sooner than the others. The second part about that is, with that meeting that we would have with them, that's information that we would gather. And quite honestly, for the most part, all of those ponds within just a few minutes, we can, through our mapping, we can figure out the age of those ponds. So as they would bring those forward, that's one of the things that we would research. Our plan data, we'd figure out about how old it was and investigate kind of what the real issue is and work with that applicant. So that's how I would see us addressing those things. But yeah, that's an excellent question.
Gotcha. Thank you. No, that's really helpful. Because I do think that, even if it is just knowing the age of it, as you look through the rest of this criteria is helpful. So if that's going to be sort of in as part of the application process, then that satisfies my question. Sweet. Andy, any other thoughts?
All on the same page, I think.
That's great. So Andy, I'm comfortable if you are in recommending this through our committee report to council at the next council meeting.
I'm in agreement. In looking at one of the slides, there were 3 options.
Yeah.
Do not recommend pilot a stormwater grant program for publicly owned, which I think is what we're talking about. And then pilot a stormwater grant for all residential stormwater ponds. So I think we're talking about in agreement on number 2, I think.
Yep.
Is that right? And then what's this other question? I don't understand the second part of it is, and pursuant to the recommendation of CSAC, would the committee like to recommend the exploration of a stormwater utility? What does that mean?
So I want to go back just one slide. So the recommendation that came from the Community Services Advisory Commission, and this is something they spent a lot of time actually considering initially when they were considering funding mechanisms, was stormwater utility. And so they felt it important to call attention to maybe the long-term benefits of a stormwater utility, while also acknowledging that it's really not what they did not feel it was an appropriate solution for these very specific 40, 46, or 48 basins. So carrying that recommendation forward, I wanted to at least explore whether or not the finance committee would want to provide a recommendation for council to consider the long-term benefits of stormwater utility. And that's totally up to you all. You do not need to include it as a portion of the recommendation, but just pursuant sort of to the recommendation from CSAC, I at least wanted to carry that forward as an option here for the committee.
So that would really mean basically a fee, if you will, that we would impose upon residents.
Yes, it could. Yeah.
Gotcha. So Andy, I'm happy to have that discussion with council at large. And if they want to, either recommend that back to finance committee but it may also be a community development committee question as well. So I don't know where it better fits. I mean, I think the fee portion of it obviously fits in finance. But I wonder if the utility portion of it, like actually considering it a utility, actually fits better with the community development committee. But I'm happy to have that conversation with council if you're all right with bringing that up with them as well.
Yeah, I think we're in agreement on number 2, but
Yep.
this other topic, I think, requires further discussion.
I agree with you completely. So that is how I will bring it up in committee reports. And I will make sure that Chris knows we'll be talking about these things at the next council meeting so we don't surprise anybody. So,
Okay, great.
awesome. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for your
You're
work.
very welcome.
And Aaron and everybody else, really appreciate it. I know we kind of sent you guys back a couple times to do more research and get more information, but I think we ended up with a really good product at the end of the day. I think 2 years is really appropriate. And I think it'll give some folks an opportunity to get some repairs done that they may not otherwise be able to afford to do. And that's what's really important at the end of the day. So really appreciate all your work on it.
Thank you all.
All right. Wow. Moving right along. So next is our cemetery fund discussion, and I believe that's Matt.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm not muted. Thank you. Sorry. I wanted to bring we've had a trend of bringing different revenue solutions forward in Finance Committee this year. So this is today's stab at that topic. And the fund of interest today is the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund. Now, I want to clarify for council that the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund is not the cemetery fund. They are actually two different funds. You've seen the cemetery fund, it's part of the operating budget. You probably have not come across the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund because it's not involved in the operating budget and it's not involved in the capital budget, which would make it difficult for you to really be very familiar with. So to talk about it a little bit and to kind of educate us all on what it's capable of doing, we have Jerry O'Brien, who is our chief accountant. He's going to talk about the fund, and then we'll have some recommendations regarding utilization of the fund. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jerry.
Hello, good evening, members of council and everyone. I'm here to talk about the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund and give a brief overview of it. So this, the city established this fund under the authority of Ohio Revised Code Section 759.12 and 759.15. And the purpose of this fund was to provide a mechanism for collecting and accumulating resources to help with the maintenance of the cemetery. So we have been receiving into this fund since its establishment money mainly through the sale of cemetery lots, NIT sales, and fees from the transfer of ownership of lots. So according to the Ohio Revised Code, the receipts in this fund become principal of that fund and are to be held in perpetuity. The intent is to invest those funds and then use that money as a way to help maintain the cemetery in perpetuity. So that principal amount can never be expended. And it's on our financial statements is presented as a non-spendable balance. And then the interest earned on that principal is presented as restricted. So as of December 31st of 2020, our non-spendable balance was $1,130,329, and then our interest was the $443,937. So the $443,000 is the money that we can expend toward maintenance of the cemetery. So we have the fund was established in 1995. So this is over quite a period of time that we've collected this money. So on, for example, in the last 5 years, our average interest going into that fund was about $30,500. So it takes a while to build up a balance in that fund that we can actually use. But as of right now, we've got some money that we can use in that. So we've never expended any money out of that fund. So Matt is here to talk about how we might do that.
So as Jerry discussed, there's about $443,000 available that is potentially spendable out of this fund. And we would staff are recommending that the Finance Committee recommend to council that we explore some potential uses of this funding. As I said, and Jared said, we've never utilized this fund. Some potential uses for it under consideration include capital improvements to the cemetery itself, including improvements to gravestones, veterans markers, mausoleums, etc. I think the idea behind what we would want to explore is it has taken us 25 years to build up this fund balance. We would want to invest in capital improvements that mirror that long time horizon, so that we would make a lasting impact to the cemetery and make a noticeable difference by utilizing this funding. We would examine these potential uses and bring forward a recommendation either in a future capital budget. I don't know if the timeline for this year's capital budget works out, but if it doesn't work out for the capital budget, it could be in a supplemental ordinance for council's consideration as these ideas are investigated and brought forward. So I think right now we're just looking for a thumbs up to start considering this funding, given that we've never utilized it.
Yeah, Matt, I know you and I had a brief conversation about this. I'm all for it. I think it's a really good idea. I know that we've talked for quite some time about veterans markers in particular. I think this would be a great way for us to accomplish a goal like that. And I'd love for staff or even staff to work with CSEC to explore what the other potential possibilities would be for us to use this funding. You know, and what I'd really like to do is to maybe set up a way that we can take a 5-year look at thoughts about how we might use the funding. And we could put that in the capital plan if we needed to. But that way we, you know, because we know roughly how much, you know, interest we're earning and money we're bringing into that fund, how much is there to be used each year. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. Andy, what are your thoughts?
Well, first, I'm really really bummed that in my orientation I didn't learn about the Cemetery Perpetual Care Fund. I only learned about the Cemetery Fund, and it's pretty confusing. My thought or my understanding was it was intended to help maintain the cemetery, but you can't spend the principal. You can only spend the interest. So it's a little weird, but leave it to city government to make things complicated. So last night we learned about this Leadership Dublin class that recently graduated, and one of the groups in Leadership Dublin was looking at QR codes for grave markers. Christina mentioned specifically veterans, and you know that would certainly be a starting point.
Yeah.
But if someone like Tom Holton is bored and wants to research, you know, anyone that's buried in the cemetery, it would be a pretty cool thing to take a walk through there and scan a QR code with your phone and either hear or be able to read a narrative about the specific person and the life they led in and around Dublin. So I think it would be silly to not use it. And I think there are all kinds of creative things that we could use it for.
Yep. I think you got your thumbs up there, Matt.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much.
Awesome. Yeah, I can't wait to hear what you guys come up with as far as different ways to leverage that fund. So that's fantastic. All right, great. And I think we're on to bed tax grant awards. Our revisiting of this year in this crazy year.
Hello, members of the committee. So today we're gonna spend a few minutes just reviewing the Hotel Motel Fund bed tax grants, and then discuss how to best allocate the available funds. So on the next page, and also I would like to mention that Allison Leroy from Community Events is here with us today to help facilitate the discussion. So just as a reminder, we have $200,000 appropriated for Hotel Motel grants, and we previously awarded $185,442 back in December of 2021, with the intent to come back in 2021 and revisit the remaining budget of $14,558 and allocate amongst the grantees. And we did so to take into account some of the unknown and unpredictable impact of the COVID-19 environment. So here we are today, and on the next page, you see a list of all the organizations, the events that were submitted to receive a grant, the request amount, what was recommended back in December, and the unawarded amount, so what's still pending and available to be awarded with the $14,000 that we have available. So I'm going to go ahead real quick and share a spreadsheet to help us drive the conversation. Just give me a second. Go. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see it, but it's real
Really
small.
Okay.
Uh-oh, Andy put his glasses on. We're in trouble now.
So let me see if I can make it bigger here. Oop. Okay. Is that better?
Okay, that's
So,
good.
Much
Okay.
better.
Hold on. Sorry. I will adjust it. I promise. Give me a second.
No problem. Take your time, Rosa.
I just want to make sure that you see all of the information. Okay. Yeah. So here in column G, which is what I want you to see, is some of the notes that we received from events and Allison. So with that, if you have any questions about the events, what's still available, and how
So
to distribute
The
it.
ones that say reallocation, no timing, what does that mean?
Those
So
are the ones that already happened. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Allison.
Those are ones that, when we looked at it, they've already happened. So they're either done or, well, for example, Fest would have been done because we had said we would review in June. So we're a
Gotcha.
little ahead of the game.
Okay. Hey, Rosa, can you, for column F, can you squish that down a little bit so that I can see column H? Okay, so really the only ones that we need to consider are those top ones there, right through HDBA.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And this event here was canceled. I'm not sure if the intent, Allison, is to then have that money available to others or just leave it sitting there.
Which one was canceled? Fest?
Fest. At least that's what I have here in my notes.
So if Fest was canceled and we
Yeah.
wanted to leverage those funds to fully fund everybody else.
Part of the things with Fest, and it's a discussion that we kind of had internally. Obviously, they would have been next week in coordination with the tournament, and they made the decision a while ago that with things being as uncertain as they were, they didn't want to move forward with it. Now, knowing that they did have, we've talked to Crawford Hoying, they possibly might want to have some events in the fall/winter. So we weren't sure whether you would want to consider maybe leaving something for them to fund some other events that they might have. It probably would not be at the level of Fest, and they don't have those plans in place yet, but it's something to at least consider. Because one of the things too, they had asked for, as the sponsor as well for the Dublin market, they had a 10,000 unawarded for the Dublin market last year. But I'm not sure they would actually need that extra funding for the market as much as they would need it for something else.
So you think, so for the market, they have that 10,000 unawarded, but you're not sure they really need that?
Yeah, I think they might prefer, if we were going to just say fund everybody, they might prefer to say it's 10,000 unidentified at this point, so that if they found another event that they really wanted to fund, I think that might better serve the purpose.
Understood. I would be very fine with that. Andy, what are your thoughts?
I apologize, ladies. I'm maybe 10 steps behind you. I'm very confused. I see this no timing. And to me, I thought that that meant that it's not going to happen.
It's just
But-
it's already done. Like it's either already done, so we wouldn't consider doing an additional allocation to them because of the
Okay.
timing.
So just more or less, we need to ignore any reallocation on those entries, right?
Yep. Yep, you got it.
Now I don't see dates that correspond to any of these, but the way I look at it is what events have yet to occur? What did they ask for? What did we give them? And what has been forfeited by events that haven't taken place that we could reallocate to the ones that are yet to happen?
The ones that haven't
Right.
taken place yet that we can consider for reallocation are lines 4 through 9. So the Classic Auto Show through the Historic Dublin Business Association. Those are the ones that have not
Okay.
yet occurred. The amount that Rosa has just highlighted there in the unawarded column, that's the amount that we did not award them because we weren't sure what was going to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Thank you.
we have $14,000 available. And what they were saying was that Forfest, because Forfest was canceled, we still have 28,000 that we can
Yeah.
take from Forfest,
Right,
right?
right.
To use, which pretty much covers everything we've got here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
But what Allison was saying is that instead of giving the $10,000 to the Dublin market, because they probably don't really need it for that, we would actually just have a placeholder there for Crawford Hoying if they found another event for this fall that they really wanted to do.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I'd be really okay with that approach.
The other ones I just wanted to point out too, there were some, there was one specific, the Dublin Charity Cup. There was an amount originally in their application for a website, a new website build. At the time of the meeting last year, you had not wanted to give them the money for that. So it wasn't necessarily that the money wasn't available. I think it was just more a discussion whether that fit into the actual application and as well. And that's up to you if they want to. And then also just to point out to the the cruise in car show, they asked for the extra $10,000 in their application. They specifically asked for that in case they needed any COVID additional safety, if they were going to have to buy masks or add.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember that. So I wonder if we need to, because I don't think they're going to need to at this point. So I wonder if we just, I think we need to follow up from them. I mean, I think if they need to purchase PPE with some of the money that we did not award them initially, I'd be fine with that. But I mean, looking at the numbers today, I think we're going to drop below 50 per 100,000 like next week, which means all those mask recommendations are going to go away. So I'd be fine if you wanted to, Andy, what are your thoughts about this is for the Classic Auto Show, right? So Andy, do you want to just maybe put like $5,000 on hold for them for PPE if they need it?
I don't know if there's any kind of policy with respect to criteria for how we determine who gets what, but I kind of look at it as which of these are going to stimulate the local economy and bring money into Dublin, bring people into Dublin. Classic Auto Show does that. The Dublin
does.
Market does that. The Classic Car Show does that. I don't know what the Historic Dublin Business Association uses that 50,000 or 38,000 for, but I can point to specific things that these other ones do. So I'd be inclined to give the Classic Auto Show at least 5, if not all 10.
Yeah.
In the Dublin Market, at least leaving some in reserves for them because we know what the Dora already did in 1 week, and as this just keeps on building, the economy is really going to get stimulated by some of this stuff. So that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, no, and I think it's an appropriate way to look at it. So HDBA, and maybe we should have included the applications. Are they in the packet? I don't think they are. We should.
They are not.
Yeah, we probably should have included them in there. So, Andy, if you have a chance to go back through HDBA's proposal, they do a lot of stuff. Like they do the slider challenge, they do the chili cook-off, they do a bunch of stuff. Now, some stuff they have not been able to do, and definitely a lot of their focus is for local folks, but they bring in a fair number of people as well. They do a phenomenal job. What she was saying about Dublin Market is they don't really need that 10,000. Crawford Hoying would rather have that 10,000 for something kind of set aside for the fall. And that's why I said that, because I agree with you. I think it does bring people in. You know, and this $10,000 for the Classic Auto Show wasn't really for the auto show itself. It was specifically for if they needed extra cleaning supplies and PPE. That's why I'm saying maybe we hold aside $5,000 for them for that if they do need it.
That makes sense. Mhm.
Yeah, we'll take we won't give the Dublin Market that $10,000, but we'll set that $10,000 aside for Crawford Hoying for an event if they're able to find one they want to do for the fall. And we fund the rest of these. What was the one with the website again, Allison? I'm sorry.
It was now I'm gonna mix them up because I get the sports one mixed up. It was the Charity Cup.
The charity.
So to see, because they asked for 14,000 and we
Yeah.
gave them 9.
Yeah.
So it was the difference of the
Oh, yeah.
5,000.
That's a lot of money for a website, if you ask me.
And I can try to pull it up while we're sitting here to see if that full amount was for the website.
Yeah, that's a nice website.
Yeah, I think it's a bit much for a website.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull it up just to be sure exactly what the exact amount was requested.
I mean, I'd be okay giving them a little bit for the website, because I do think that is a portal into how, people will find the event and then come into the city. But
It actually looks like the website update they had, so we did fund a bit of it, looks like, because they had it budgeted for 7,500.
that's a big upgrade.
So yeah, of their 14,201, the original budget request, 7,500 was for the website update.
Gotcha. So we gave them effectively 7,500 for the website and 1,500 for their event. If you want to, I mean, it's probably not going to break down that way, but roughly. I don't know, Andy, what are your thoughts?
It's somewhat subjective. How about another couple thousand for them?
I was going to say maybe we split it in half and do like 2,500.
Yep. Fair enough.
Cool.
And I'm sorry, the Classic Auto Show that you said, say 5,000 there? It's
Yep.
like item 4.
Yeah, put 5,000 there. And that way,
Yeah,
if they do
that's good.
some money for PPE, they'll have some. And if they don't need it, that's great. They don't need it.
And just to be clear, you do want to restrict that $5,000 is for PPE and the $10,000 originally appropriated is for city services and other reimbursable costs. I just want to be very clear on that distinction.
Yeah, because I think that's
Right.
what they originally asked for.
It might
Yeah.
be PPE and maybe we just say any other, because they might need to add more bathrooms or something like that.
Pandemic
I think
related.
that's put in there.
Yep,
I
I
happen
think-
to know that bathrooms, because we're getting extra hand washing units and that's costing us a little extra. So that could be something we're looking at too.
Yep,
Okay.
I think that's fine. Pandemic related expense would be fine with me.
I can consult with Allison on what that is. It sounds like bathrooms are in.
I think Allison probably has a better idea than pretty much anyone else what could be considered pandemic related as far as a public event is concerned.
I've got a clue.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Dublin Market, do you want to make that 5 now or 0?
So he just made a note that we're setting it aside for a future Crawford Hoying event.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
the reallocation, the note there.
Yeah.
Yep. I think this looks great. I'm
So
super
the-
happy with it.
Right now, it looks like we have 4,000 available.
Yeah, I'm okay with kind of keeping that aside, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
I'm really
me
good
too.
with it.
Me too.
Because honestly, if one of these events from between now and the end of the year comes forward and they're like, ooh, we had this thing that we didn't know about, we could consider talking it through, but I'm very comfortable with this.
Me too.
Sounds good. Thank you.
No, thank you for your help with it.
Yeah, thanks for memorializing it all in the spreadsheet there.
Yes, I love this style of doing it. When I first got on finance committee a few years ago now, we didn't have the spreadsheet that was up there, so we couldn't play with it. This is so much better. It's so nice.
We will memorialize that in a memo that I circulate to you, Christina, so that you can give the recommendation to the council members in a way that, is easy to transmit and digest.
Yeah, thank you. That'd be really super helpful. And Andy, thank you so much for the conversation. This worked out, it actually worked out a lot better than I thought it was. I just didn't know what to expect as we got into this year. So it feels good to have some clarity and some direction for the rest of the year. So that's, I don't know, that's more of a sense of well-being from my perspective. All right, moving on. We're just rolling through it tonight. Bed tax appropriation.
So this is the topic that was on the prior finance committee's agenda that we did not get to, so we'll tackle it tonight. And it's been a longstanding topic of conversation. So the hotel motel community grant appropriation. So just to kind of review hotel motel tax uses holistically, the ordinance itself, Ordinance 133-87 spells out the appropriate uses for the hotel motel tax fund. And I copied the ordinance here and kind of specified how we're meeting those uses laid out in that ordinance. The first part is for the 25% of hotel motel tax revenues that are given to our Convention and Visitors Bureau, which in our case is obviously Visit Dublin, Ohio. That's a legally required minimum amount and was the number that was provided to Visit Dublin, Ohio up until 2016 when it was increased by council to 35%. Some other uses that are permitted in that account include the additional 10% of hotel motel taxes permitted under that section. Development agreements, an example of that would be the Bridge Park Development Agreement. 25% of the money for cultural arts, and we meet that by sending it to the Dublin Arts Council every year, including the beautification of public property, which our Art in Public Places program sets out to beautify our public places. And then, of course, our special events, community events division is funded out of the Hotel Motel Fund, including the Irish Festival, Spooktacular, St. Patrick's Day, etc. And then under the second part of that section is the community organizations applying for these grants to have events. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. So just to kind of set the stage here and kind of look at this holistically, this is a revenue graph of hotel motel tax revenue dating back to 2009. And as you can see, from 2009 to 2019, there was a steady increase. Obviously, we've kind of reset that in 2020, 2021. We'll probably be reset again in 22 and 23, but hopefully we'll get back on that long-term trajectory sooner rather than later. But I showed that graph to help the next one in context. So this is the reverse of that, but what it's demonstrating is the percentage of revenues that have been dedicated to community grants historically. So how much have these been in a historical context? And you can see that they used to account for about 10% of hotel motel revenues were then redistributed back as a community grant. That number fell to under 6% in 2019. And of course, with the revenue losses and us not changing the appropriation, it's jumped back up. So that kind of gives you some frame of reference for where have they been historically. It's also important to know, though, that there are other things that have changed historically with this fund. So there are four major things that are funded out of hotel motel: Visit Dublin, Ohio, the Arts Council, community grants, and then other, which is predominantly our special events. And it looks like on here special events is taking up all of that orange bar, but it isn't. It's actually special events. And then as we'll see on the next slide, any increase in fund balance is contained in that bar. So while community grants used to comprise 10%, the amount comprised by Visit Dublin, Ohio and the Arts Council in a majority of those years was also 10% lower. So we can see that we've increased Visit Dublin, Ohio and the Arts Council's appropriations, and that has reduced the amount available for our special events, fund balance increases, and the community grants to the amounts that we see today. So that's kind of what the historical usage of the fund has been. The other important thing to consider is, you know, it sounds strange, but not that long ago, the Fund 232 had a really healthy fund balance of about $4 million. It's just important to know in the context that of the vast majority of that fund balance was earned prior to 2015. And that since 2015, you know, not counting for 2020, you can see it's been up and down, basically flat since that time, since we increased the appropriations for the Arts Council and Visit Dublin, Ohio. And the main takeaway there is just that increasing the appropriation for community grants substantially is likely to impact the long-term fund balance based on current revenues, even if we are to maybe return to normal. So the appropriation history, there's no guiding policy for the level of community grants. It has been $200,000 since 2009 and has not changed. Staff are recommending, we set the amount, staff recommends the amount as part of the operating budget. So we bring forward a budget and we put $200,000 in there, and then that is part of a council conversation as you review the bed tax. And again, it hasn't changed since 2009. We are recommending a potential change and a potential policy option of it be available to kind of allow this appropriation to grow and keep track and with inflation and the growth of the fund itself. So some numbers to kind of put this policy option into consideration are that 2019 revenue was a little over $3.6 million. At that time, the $200,000 amount was about 5.5% of those actual revenues. We could set an appropriation to be a minimum appropriation of $200,000 so that there's not an obvious decrease in these leaner years as we're moving away from the pandemic, or a percentage of revenues rounded up to the nearest thousand. If we had a policy like this based on 2019 actuals, the 2020 appropriation would have been $201,000 based on a 5.5% recommendation, 219 based on a 6, or 255 based on a 7% of the prior year's revenues recommendation. So our policy recommendation would be that we do the greater of an appropriation of 200,000 so that it doesn't fall, or 6% of the prior year's hotel motel taxes rounded up to the nearest $1,000. Based on the 2019 actuals, the amount appropriated for community grants would have increased by about 10%. It would have been $219,000. It's similar to the other appropriations made from hotel motel taxes. We're used to talking about 35, 25. We could add 35, 25, and 6 to that conversation on how the revenues are distributed. It allows hotel motel taxes to recover prior to increasing the appropriation. So we'll need to return to our previous funding revenue levels before we really see that increase. But also it can be reviewed regularly and modified as necessary. If 6% isn't enough of an increase, as the revenues recover, we can look at that. And always, council would have the opportunity to review this appropriation annually as part of the budget process. So that is our recommendation. Of course, all parts of it are modified. We could set a different minimum. It could be 225 or X%. It could be any number. I erred very conservatively because of the times that we're in and where we're at. And if we're going to increase it, I want you to be able to increase it, not to tell me to be less generous than my recommendation. So that's kind of where we're at and one potential path forward.
Thanks, Matt, for the presentation. Really appreciate it. You know, it's we certainly do see an increase in heads and beds and people using our restaurants and all those things as a result of the grants that we give out for the events that we have. And certainly some of them bring in more tax revenue and more other types of revenue than others do. No doubt about it. But as Andy will tell you, being the dollars guy that he is, $200,000 today is not worth the same amount of money as $200,000 in 2009. And so I think we're overdue for putting together a plan that ties the amount of grant money that we have specifically to the revenue that we've received in the fund. I like that it is based on the previous year's revenue so that it's a little bit of a look back instead of assuming what you're going to get in the coming year. That I feel pretty comfortable with. I like the 6%. You know, I think back over the last 6 years to the dollar amounts that we get requested, and they usually fall, and, you know, Allison, you can tell me if I'm wrong, or Matt, tell me if I'm wrong. My recollection in sort of a rough estimate is they tend to fall, you know, the total amount asked between about 225 and 245 roughly. So if we had about 220 or 225 roughly that we were able to give away, we would be able to satisfy the vast majority of what we get asked for, while still having to be a little bit judicious about what we do, which I think is good because we should be scrutinizing these applications. Does that sound about right? You're muted, Allison.
I will say we're already getting some other people talking, especially with Riverside Crossing Park opening. We do expect the number of requests we get to go up. Now, again, I don't know what the quality of those will be, but I'm kind of assuming that that's going to happen over the next few years.
Gotcha. I do like having a floor of 200,000. I mean, that feels fine to me as well. Andy, what are your thoughts?
So, being a numbers guy, a couple things. 200,000 in 2009 is somewhere between 246 and about 300,000, depending on whether you inflate it by 1% or 2%, which are pretty conservative numbers. So 200 seems a little short for me. So I would not be opposed to ratcheting it up and then from that point forward, indexing it exactly the way you did, make it a minimum of whatever number we set, 225 or 250, and then the greater or the lesser of that or the 6%. If I look at the trend line of the historic community grants as a percentage of revenue, the fact that that trend line is going down tells me that the revenue is going up. So it, ignoring 2020, of course, but so that's my 2 cents. I think personally 200 is a little low. I think we get it up to a 2021 number and then index it from there.
Cool. Why don't you want to start with 225 as the minimum and index it from there? Will that work for you? Cool. Awesome. I am all on board with that.
I would recommend that you increase the percentage from 6 to 6.5 then, because based on 19 revenues, that 225, you'll have to far exceed that.
Yep, that makes sense.
You'll see delayed growth. So I would index it to 6.5.
That makes sense.
Per seat.
Excellent.
Yep.
Okay.
I am all for that. So we will, since we are in agreement, I will take that to council as a report item as well. Because they'll need to approve that. So we're gonna have a whole big long report at our next council meeting, Andy.
Better you than me. You're the chair. You get to regurgitate all this stuff.
I should tell Chris, like, we should probably do the finance committee report at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah.
Because by the end, I don't know how long the agenda is for the next council meeting, but by the time we get to the end, everybody's so tired.
Yeah.
So,
bullet points.
Yeah, I know. These are a little juicier than bullet points though, so. All right, super. Well, I have all my stuff written down that I will take to council in our report. And Matt, I may reach out to you just to help me summarize it before the next council meeting.
Absolutely. And we have another finance committee meeting prior to our next council meeting, because our next finance committee meeting is June 7th. So we will have a meeting on June 7th to discuss bond refinancing and Dublin 2035 and a couple other smaller topics. But those are the two big ones that we'll be discussing at that committee meeting as
Super.
well.
That's great. I look forward to it. All right. Anyone have anything else for the good of the order? Hearing nothing, then I would say that we are adjourned with much appreciation. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you.
Right.
Good night.